Welcome, everyone. I am David Weinstein, Director of the Center on Japanese Economy and Business, also called CJEB at Columbia Business School, and the Carl S. Shoup Professor of the Japanese Economy at Columbia University. On behalf of the center, I am delighted to welcome you all to the importance of diversity, recognizing the hurdles to achieving change. Before starting today's talk, I want to briefly introduce the center. CJEB was established in 1986 by Professor Hugh Patrick, and in July of 2019, I became the new director. Our mission at CJEB is to promote knowledge and understanding of Japan's economy and its business systems in an international context. We continue to pursue our mission as we adapt to the world's new normal with webinars such as this. At Columbia Business School, we believe that diversity strengthens any community or business model and brings it greater success. This belief is grounded not only in the moral nature of treating everyone equally, but also because it makes economic sense. Here, we need only think about the progress that has been made in the United States in improving diversity over the last 50 years. In 1960, roughly 90% of all top positions, managers, doctors, lawyers, were held by white men. Today, white men account for roughly 60% of those positions. That change has been hard fought for, but it seems like it has had very substantial impacts on US productivity. In studies of what the impacts are of choosing the best person for a position rather than choosing the best man for a position, we found that it tends to raise productivity, at least in the United States, by as much as 40%. So this is an important issue in the United States, and I think it's also one of the most, if not the most important issue facing Japan, which is a society in which women still occupy a very small share of top managerial positions. Therefore, I'm really interested in hearing what Onoda Sensei is going to tell us about the challenges and opportunities that increased diversity creates. At CJEB, we've launched the Japanese Management Leadership Program in 2020 to support Japanese executives and emerging leaders with the latest research methodologies to hone their leadership skills. Today's webinar is part of this program's Women Career Advancement, in which we promote and encourage equal treatment and career development opportunities for all genders. So I'm very honored to introduce today's speaker, Kimi Onoda, a member of the House of Councillors of the National Diet of Japan, representing Okayama Prefecture. Ms. Onoda is a member of the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP. She is a member of the Committee on Education, Culture, as well as the Committee on Rules and Administration, and the Special Committee on Regional Issues and Consumer Affairs of the House of Councillors. She is also director of both the Youth Division and the Women's Affairs Division of the LDP. And uniquely for a Japanese politician, Ms. Onoda is of mixed race descent. She was born in the US state of Illinois to a Japanese mother and an American father, and was raised in Okayama, Japan. We at CJEB are truly excited to have Ms. Onoda join us today, and we look forward to hearing more about her personal history, including the challenges and opportunities that may come with being a woman, young, and mixed race as a politician in Japan. So without any further ado, I want to invite Ms. Onoda to begin her talk. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the kind invitation to participate in this event. It is both my pleasure and honor to join you all here today of this occasion. First, I wish to thank Director Weinstein for organizing this event. As introduced, I am a member of House of Councillors for the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, and I served as a parliamentary vice minister of justice until last month. I started my career working for a video game company, and then I decided to run for political office in my local assembly. As such, this year marks the 10th anniversary of my entry into political life. Professor Weinstein mentioned that the school is very active in area of DEI, and I'm interested in hearing some unique stories for me. So today I will speak about diversity and integrity. Let me start by sharing some experiences from my childhood, and I would like to present my views on the stereotypes that we tend to impose on others in our attempt to promote diversity. I'm half Japanese, born between a Japanese mother and an Irish American father. Now, for those of you uncomfortable with the simplified term of half, please bear with me as I will explain my thoughts later down the line. I was born in USA after my parents' international marriage. When I was 1 year old, my parents and I returned to Japan to live with my grandfather. One day, when I was 2, I woke up in the morning and found that my father had suddenly gone away. Since then, I was raised by my mother in a single parents household. At the time of my father's disappearance, my mother was pregnant with my young sister. Life was hard. We were hand-me-downs from relatives and lived simple lives without even dreaming of eating out or going on vacations. Still, my mother insisted that her daughters receive a proper education, even if that meant going into debt. Thanks to her determination, we went to good school, and I am now a member of that diet. I grew up in the countryside of Japan where there were no foreigners or half Japanese residents. No sooner had I entered nursery school and starting to have social interaction with those outside of my family that I became a target of persecution. All the kids at my school chased me, threw rocks at me, and beat me up while yelling, "Dirty foreigner, go back to America." At first, I did not understand the reason for my mistreatment. I thought that maybe I had done something to offend other people, so I just accepted it. However, once I understood that my abuse was fueled by racial difference, I decided to maximize my resistance, arguing that I had not done anything wrong. They are the ones who were wrong. Fortunately, I was taller and stronger than the other kids, and I was determined to fight back whenever I was bullied, and it worked. The number of kids bullying me gradually decreased, but these attacks continued until I graduated from my small public elementary school in the countryside. In the close environment of a small community of group, it is often perceived that being different from others is bad. Of course, this is not just limited to those who are half Japanese. For example, if you do better than others in school or disagree with controversial rules that are tastefully accepted by all, you will be unpopular. I think that any environment that blindly condemns differences from the majority, I think that any environment, as bad, differences from the majority as bad, regardless whether that difference is better or worse, is wrong. It is wrong because it generates an environment where the promise of evolution and growth is precluded. My mother could not bear to watch me battle peer pressure every day in such a narrow-minded environment and suggested that I apply to private junior high school. As a poor single parent, it must have been a difficult decision. Following my mother's advice, I entered an all-girls missionary school, which had both a middle and a high school. Having been bred mostly by men and boys, I entered this school in the hopes of an environment where I would not have to fight. A few days after starting school, I was suddenly surrounded by several older students in the hallway. I thought to myself, is this going to be the start of everyday battles again? But then they said, "Hey, will you be a friend?" I was so surprised. As it turned out, they noticed a half Japanese girl at the opening ceremony and simply wanted to become friends with me since I was unique. I was fortunate to enroll into a junior high school where many of the senior students, classmates, and teachers were open-minded and viewed being different as unique, and that individuality should be treasured. This concept was very new, even nearly a utopian environment for me, as I had always been rejected for my differences. This environment where I was not inevitably rejected for the traits that I was born with, or even my thinking or lifestyle assigned my development as an individual, and enabled me to grow as a person. I learned interesting perspective and ways of thinking through exchanging views with other unique individuals. My energy spent on fighting these challenges shifted to clarifying and fulfilling my dreams. I would not be who I am today had I not gone to that school. Another reason why I am glad that attended that school is that it was an all-girls school. Generally speaking, we often say in junior high school the differences between boys and girls become more apparent than in elementary school. For example, in the past, the subjects studied at school were separated, such as shop class and home economics, where boys were given technical training using tools, while girls were taught to cook, etc. The curriculum of physical education class was also different. Even when working together, the role tended to be divided by gender. Boys would do the physical work, while girls would be charged with the more detailed activities, rather than consider what a student wants to do as an individual or what a student is good at. However, this is not the case at girls' schools, as there are only female students. For example, at the cultural festival, those who are good at hard work are assigned to do physical work. Those who like cooking are assigned to making sweets, and so on. Tasks were assigned based on a student's individual abilities and interests. The environment was very flat and fair, where people were viewed as individuals rather than being categorized. The discomfort I felt when I went out into society was the same old stereotypes, such as this is how a man should be, or this is how a woman should be, was extraordinary. I wondered if I had been transported back in time by a couple hundred years. Then I recalled that when there are events held out in the Japanese countryside, it would often be the case that the women were working all the time. Whether it be preparing or serving food, the men would just gather around eating and drinking. As a student, I thought, I definitely do not want to be forced into this stereotypical categorization, and I sure do not want to live here. This notion that being different is bad or having set archetypes for women and men. This way of thinking is everywhere, but I think that learns to be stronger in the countryside. To me, though, it is no more than form of pain imposed upon me. After graduating from high school, I left the countryside and went to a university in Tokyo. Nowadays in Japan, young women are concentrating in Tokyo, escaping from the countryside. Some Diet members who advocate for the revitalization of Japanese regional economies blame this on the fact that women like trendy and glamorous things, so they go to the cities out of admiration, which is disgraceful. However, according to the survey on why young people move to Tokyo, which was released by Prime Minister's office, an interesting trend was found. When asked why they moved to Tokyo, about 32% of males, while only 24% of females answered because they admire city life. Meanwhile, women tended to answer that they had moved because they wanted to get away from their hometown and parents. This was the case for about 27% of women, which is a greater figure than those women who answered that they have an admiration for life in the city. We should look deeper into the responses of the women who answered that they wished to leave their hometowns and carefully examine to reason as to why. In today's society, we can no longer bind people by imposing one's narrow opinion of the world. For instance, we now live in a connected world and we can access any variety of social values from around the world through our smartphones. However, it is important to note that while some young women do not like the values of rural Japan, others are comfortable with this traditional way of thinking. If the individual prefers these even after knowing of all the other types of value and possibilities out there, she should not be condemned for believing that traditional values are best for her. Fundamentally, it is important to respect the values of each individual. I would like to reiterate the importance of this fact. Even though there may be a trend in the way women tend to think, we are still all individuals. A trend does not tell the whole story, and it should not be treated as consensus. A few minutes ago, I mentioned my time at an all-girls school. I said that attending an all-girls school taught me importance of looking at the individual rather than just the gender categorization. The template asserting that all women are XYZ or that all women think a certain way is meaningless, because even though we are all women, we all have different ways of thinking of and living. With this in mind, I would like you to think about how we can realize diversity. This is something that I have felt very strongly about since childhood. It is very important to live in an environment that recognizes diversity. I believe that the imposition of blanket categorizations, political system, religions, etc., will not lead to development of society, Therefore, there is nothing wrong with the recent trend that calls for diversity. However, diversity does have its pitfalls. While shouting diversity, people tend to solve issues by categorizing individuals. Take the Japanese diet. For example, Japan is often criticized for having too few female diet members. But is this a superficial number? Is this the only important factor for achieving gender equality? In the first place, a diet member's job is to represent the constituents of all demographics, regardless of whether they are male or female. Otherwise, the opinions of children who, of course, cannot run for office or vote would not be represented, who would they? So I think that is nonsensical to divide the diet by gender. The LDP presidential election, which happened to also be the election to decide the next Prime Minister of Japan, was held on 30 September. For the first time in 30 years, a female candidate announced her candidacy. Her name is Ms. Sanae Takaichi. She is a wonderful politician who is well versed in the wide range of policies, quick-witted, and has a strong sense of duty and humanity. I have been a supporter of hers for many years because I believe that she is an ideal candidate. I do not support her just because she is a woman, but because she is an excellent politician who happens to be a woman. However, when she announced her candidacy for the LDP presidency, an interesting newspaper article appeared alleging that she is unpopular among her female colleagues because she does not participate in any of the female-only diet member meetings or groups. Therefore, a politician who does not focus on policies specific to women is not suitable to be the first female prime minister. Does anyone else think this is strange? The same people who condemned discrimination against women are now discriminating against women who do not fit their categories, saying, "It is strange that you do not behave certain way even though you are a woman. Therefore, I won't support you." This is an election to decide the leader of the nation. Of course, not all other female politicians engaged in such discrimination. There were many female diet members, including myself, who object to it. Still, many Japanese women who are not in policies, but engaged in activities that promote gender equality, criticize Ms. Sanae Takaichi much like her female colleagues in the diet did. These women even criticize Ms. Takaichi for not having children, arguing that a woman whose priority her career cannot relate to a housewife. Women who have not had children cannot craft policies about raising kids. I do not want someone who has been working like a man to pose as the representative of women, or even she incapable of crafting policy from a woman's perspective. I cannot bear to listen to this form of abusing commentary. How is it that Ms. Takaichi, who is a woman herself, is incapable of understanding a women's perspective? This idea in itself is confined by this concept of categorization. There are many different ways of life for women. Those who stay single, those who get married, those who have children, those who do not, those who dedicate their lives to work, those who live for their families. All of these lifestyles apply to women. For example, I am a single woman who has no intention of ever getting married, but that does not mean that I intend to be a diet member who represents people who live the same way that I do. It is my job to think about policies that benefit the lives of all women and all people for that matter, whether they be young or old, male or female. I take pride in that. Yet, has said it is that women themselves who have always hated discrimination, have a stereotypical view that defines women and criticizes women who live differently from themselves, alleging that they do not have a women perspective. This is why I am very uncomfortable being asked to share my opinions as a female parliamentarian. We should stop imposing categories that an attribute defines as being placed into and respect the diversity of individuals. There is no such thing as an absolute representation of women. This problem of seeking diversity but being constrained by attributes is not only a problem for women, but also pitiful in any circumstance related to diversity. For example, the issue of race and minorities are similar. There are people who say to me, "You are part foreigner, so you must have foreigner-friendly policies, right? So these are the actions you should take." For God's sake, such notions are ridiculous. I am a member of the Japanese diet. Unfortunately, it often the people who call for varying diversity who are also the very same people who impose the stereotypes associated with attributes that we very same people that we are born with without our choosing, rather than categorization of attributes which we have choosing, such as one profession. It is often the people who shout about diversity who are also the ones who brand others with labels associated with the attributes that they did not choose for themselves. This is a very strange behavior, and its proposers do not have think it had do all have think the same way, or are half forbidden for thinking the same way as the majority of Japanese who happen to be pure-blooded. Just because you belong to a minority does not necessarily mean you have to adapt the way thinking that is stereotypical of minorities. And yet, the ones who criticize discrimination are also the ones that demand that we look, stand, and speak in a way they wish minorities to do so. Then these same peoples condemn those who do not conform to their will. These people often ridicule women who are not feminists as ordinary men, accuse blacks who oppose the BLM movement of not being part of the Black community, and label me, a half Japanese, as deliberately acting Japanese to compensate so that I may look more Japanese. They do not respect my opinion as individuals. They do not tolerate people who do not conform to the desired image of minorities. I have seen many of these people in my life. From my point of view, the people who threw stones at me saying, "Dirty foreigner, go back to America," look equally as ugly as those who gently say, "The opinion of minority are important. You should voice your opinion as minority." After all, both sides ignoring the diversity of individuals and trying to confine them to their attributes. There is another point that often ponder, that is society treatment of minority as those who are perceived to be at the disadvantage of even weak. I am half Japanese and refer to myself as a half because that is the term that I have always used. One day, I was having a conversation with some people that I had just met when a European woman said to me with a very troubled expression on her face, "Don't call yourself half. You're not half. You have American and Japanese blood in you, so you are double." Of course, I know she meant well, but still it made me feel very uncomfortable. Is being referred to as a half a tragedy of something inferior? Strictly speaking, the term just refers to the fact that half of my racial roots are Japanese while the other half are not. That women comment made me suddenly feel like I was being transformed into victim to be pitied for my position in life, or because I recognize the facts of my identity. I feel that merely calling out these attributes or making excessive consideration for those with certain attributes and acts that transform ordinary people who do not believe that he or she have a problem into victims. I feel the same form of discomfort with the idea of cultural appropriation, which is a common topic these days. Nowadays, academic circles often use the term in a negative sense, asserting that culture which is in a dominant position in taking some from a minority culture without in consent. Ariana Grande once said that she loved the Japanese language and got a tattoo of her CD album 7 Links in Japanese with the kanji for 7 wheels. Unfortunately, this kanji combination translates to charcoal brazier in Japanese. Ariana posted a picture of her tattoo online, to which Japanese fans commented in just saying, "We are happy that you use Japanese, but your tattoo does not carry the meaning that you think it does, unless that is you meant to your tattoo to essentially read obun." Comments such as these were made in pure jest. On the other hand, comments from non-Japanese people accused her of cultural theft. As a result, Ariana stopped studying Japanese, which we were very happy that she claimed to have loved. Japanese people were saddened by this development. We do not feel dominated by a people from another country of race. We do not feel inferior. We do not lend and raise about cultural appropriation. When people get tattooed because they like the Japanese language, or when white celebrities dress up in Japanese kimonos, or when they use design that pay homage to traditional traditional costumes, provided that our culture is not used in a malicious or demeaning way. We would rather say, "Wow, she's wearing kimono," or I'm glad you are interested in Japanese culture." I think we respect each other on the equal footing, but I do not approve of those who are outside of Japan and treat Japanese culture as if it is victim of some sort that needs to be coddled as if it has been subjected to cultural shift. The important thing is to recognize each other as equals, isn't it? No matter whether you are half or pure-blooded or race are equal, and all culture are equal, there's no need to scrutinize words or to make excessive considerations. There's no need to try to protect one people from another or exalt over the others. This excessive form of consideration when looking at the bigger picture can lead to division. Let's stop categorizing people as minority or non-minorities, and as either strong or weak. Even when we don't categorize each other, these positions may change in an instant. For example, do you think that women should be treated as minorities in the workspace? In some workspace that are predominantly women, such as childcare or nursing, it can be difficult for men to work. For example, non-Japanese people are the minority in Japan, but in some schools, workspace and communities, they are the majority. In other words, it is dangerous to designate any one category of people as the only one needing to be protected or respected. In the end, the most important thing is to respect the individual and create a good environment for people from all walks of life. To summarize, do not lump people into groups based on the natural attributes such as male or female. Do not label people as either strong or weak. Diversity should not be about creating specific categorizations. And assigning quotas achieve balance. Unfairly excluding individual positions and ideas because they are different is not equality. I believe in respecting the individuality and ideas of all people, even if that means 100 different people, having 100 different ways of thinking. This is the basic premise that is needed to achieve true diversity. Professor Weinstein apologies that my opinion today may not have met the expectations of your offer, as those expectations may have been drawn slowly based on my attributes. Once again, these are just my personal views. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was great. I have to say, you did deviate from my expectations by being way better than what I initially anticipated. This was a really fascinating talk, and it was really interesting for me to hear your perspective on this issue, which, as you know, is a really important issue in the United States as well. And we currently have a very similar debate on exactly these points. So I think this fits wonderfully into the center's mission of kind of projecting US ideas into Japan and then hearing Japanese ideas on these very issues, and your talk was very impressive. I want to now move to our question and answer segment of the talk. And so I'm going to invite everyone in the audience to submit questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will try to answer as many questions as possible, but I have a feeling that we're going to have far more questions than we'll have time for answers. Just to get things started, I want to invite one of our Columbia Business School students, Yuka Takahashi, to join us with a question. I'm going to let her introduce herself and start the Q&A section. Yuka, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. My name is Yuka Takahashi, and I'm second year in Columbia Business School. So, Ms. Onoda, thank you for your talk. It was really interesting. And I want to ask one question. So in order to increase DEI in society, I think that DEI education from early childhood is very important. Based on your own childhood experience, what DEI educational programs or initiatives would you suggest to educators?
進めとかお考えがありましたら、ぜひ。
はい、日本語ですいません。やはり女子校だったから、みんなが同じ環境だから、その中で個性が尊重されたっていうのがあるので、それはちょっと特殊だったんですけど、やはりその一人一人を見ていく。あなたはきっとこのグループ、あなたはきっとこのグループというふうにグルーピングをしなくて、一人一人にきちんとその意見を聞いて、一人一人の意見を尊重するということを教育の中でしっかりとやっていきたいなというふうに思います。
Yes, thank you thank you very much. As I said earlier, I attended a female all-girls school, and I think that was really important within my life. And one of the reasons why is that I think that the individual's opinion was very much honored within that environment. It tends to be in society that we like to group each other into groups, but I think rather than grouping ourselves into different groups, it's important to listen to what the individual has to say and the opinions of that individual, and to respect those opinions.
I want to jump in and ask a question that comes back to something I said when I was introducing you. When I look at Japan, I see that Japanese women participate very heavily in the labor force, but they are largely absent from certain parts of the Japanese business world. For example, managers. We don't see that many Japanese managers. You're sitting in the Diet. There are very few Diet members who are women as well. And, you know, I think we probably both agree that women and men are roughly equal on average in terms of intelligence. And your comments indicate that, you know, there is discrimination in Japan, whether it is your experience, you know, as being, to use your word, half, or, you know, as a woman, you know, your experiences where people have made, you know, unhelpful comments, let's say that. How do you see, you know, given that women are such a large part of the Japanese population, and it seems to me that they are underused in top positions, how does Japan as a society start to address that question and start to make sure that people are given opportunities based on their abilities, as opposed to based on how people see them, either as, you know, as women or as minorities or whatever? I wonder if you could say a few words about that.
ありがとうございます。日本の問題点として私が思っているのは、男も女もブラック労働なんですよ。長時間労働。なので、例えばその正社員で働きたい、偉い人で、例えばその管理職になりたい、議員になりたいとなっても、24時間365日働くことを求められるのが日本社会の労働市場なんですね。なので、これは女性のためだけではなくて、男性も例えば怪我をして入院したら、もう会社に居場所がなくなってしまうというようなことがあるので、男も女もプライベートをきちんと大事にできるような働き方改革をしていかないと、この女性も男性も生きづらいという世の中は変わらないと思うので、みんなが働きやすい環境になれば、女性もトップの方で働けるようになると思うので、この日本の働き方の悪いところをまず変えなくてはいけないというふうに思っています。やりたい人が今のままではいないんです。チャンスがないんじゃなくて、やりたくない。
Thank you very much for your wonderful question. Actually, I do think within the Japanese labor force, or within the general labor regime of Japan, I would say that regardless if you're a man or a woman, I think the major issue is the long-term working hours, or very long working hours in general. And so whether if somebody wants to become a manager or an executive, or whether they would like to participate within the Japanese diet as a member, they're pretty much asked or forced to work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And so whether this is, this doesn't necessarily have to strictly be with just women, but also this has to do with men too. For example, if a man or a male employee were to get injured and then go into the hospital for a longer period of time, he would go back to his company and find his position that he originally had may not be waiting for him when he gets back. So I think that in order to fix the Japanese labor force, I really do think that we have to make it to where the individual's private time is also valued. So not their time away from work also needs to be fixed. And in order to achieve this, I do think that some sort of labor reform domestically within Japan will be required. Whether this has to do with men or women, I think it's important to establish an environment that is conducive for anybody, any gender to be able to work. And it's not that they do not have the opportunity, it's just that nobody wants to go into those positions because of the requirements that are asked for them within the current labor force.
I want to ask another somewhat related question, because I was really moved in your talk about the stories you told about your childhood and growing up in a rural area, dealing with those attitudes. As I'm sure you're aware, that's an issue in the United States, where there's a very big difference between, say, rural America and urban America. And this has become politically a very big issue, and economically it's a very big issue. One of the things that you mentioned in your talk was the educational problems that were there, and in particular, the difficulty you had in elementary school, and then your move to high school for girls. And I know that education is an important part of your political agenda. And I was just wondering, education to me seems like one of the most, if not the most important way in which we can level, as we say in English, level the playing field between poor kids and kids from affluent households. What kinds of policies do you think Japan should take to make it more equitable for kids of different backgrounds?
まずその貧富の格差の中で、今回ちょっと原稿で時間がなくてカットしたんですが、親が教育を重要だと思ってない貧困家庭は、子どもが教育を受けるチャンスが著しく低下します。これを解決するために今国としてやりたいのが、義務教育をさらに幼くすることです。例えば3歳からとか、今は小学校からなので5、6歳からなんですけども、そうすれば学力っていうのは小学校に上がる前に大体の基礎が決まってしまう。これが永遠に学力の格差になってしまうので、教育に親が興味がない貧困家庭でも、まだ高所得の家庭も興味がない家庭はいるんですけど、どんな家庭に生まれても公的な学校に行きさえすれば、自分の意思で教育をより受けることができる環境を作る。これに対して今日本は投資をしなくてはいけないと思い進めています。
So I actually cut this out of my speech, but unfortunately we didn't have much time, so I wasn't able to say this. But I actually was talking about the disparity between the economic disparity within Japan, and one of the things is particularly within education. If you have a student or a child who's born within a not well-to-do household and whose parents do not value education, then there's often the point that then that child will not pursue their own education. At least we see this trend. So one of the things that I do think that what we could do to level the playing field or to rectify this issue, so to speak, is that we could raise or lower the level for when mandatory education begins. Perhaps instead of at 6 years old, we could start at 3 years old. And one of the reasons why that is if you can make sure that base is solidified early on, if you didn't, rather than if you have this base that isn't solidified early on, that once that educational disparity begins, then that becomes a lifelong issue that perpetuates itself. So I think in order for Japan, in order to fix this issue is that to make systems or invest into systems that allow for the students to voluntarily go into upper levels of education. And I think that if we invest into this, this will then rectify this issue.
Thanks. That's great. I want to also just bring it back to some of the other parts of your speech, and there've been a number of questions that have come in the Q&A about some of the stories you told about yourself. You know, it sounds like growing up, you periodically had to deal with you know, people making mean comments or saying mean things to you, and I'm sure, you know, you've had to deal with stereotypes, you know, people saying, you know, because you're a woman, you should be this way or that way. But you're also a great politician and a successful politician, right? You're a member of the Diet. It doesn't get better than that. And I guess a question I have, and I think people in the audience have, is how do you deal with those types of comments? How do you handle it when people make insensitive comments and do it in a way that both makes your point that you want to be thought of as an individual, but also doesn't offend people?
そうですね。私はもともと多分強いので、誰も守ってくれる人がいなかったので、強くならなくちゃいけなかった。生きていかなくてはいけなかったので、まず自分を愛しました。誰が味方じゃなくても、自分が自分の味方で、私は正しいんだと思うまっすぐな生き方をしていけば、いつか誰かは分かってくれると思って、まっすぐに自分を貫く。特にとにかく負けちゃダメだし、自分を愛せなくなったら前に進めないので、すべての人が自分を愛して、何を言われても、人に何を言われても自分は自分が好きって言われるような状況になれば、いろんな厳しい状況に耐えていけるんじゃないかなと、まっすぐに進んでいけるんじゃないかなと思います。
So I must say that I think I was very outspoken, or I would say that I was a very strong personality growing up. And one of the reasons why this is because I didn't have anybody really to look out for me. So I had to look out for myself. So I really think it's very important for individuals to love themselves, so to speak, or value themselves, because I didn't have anybody in my corner, so to speak. So I had to be in my own corner. And if I felt that what I was saying was right, then I felt that perhaps if I just kept saying what I felt was right, other people would start to listen to me too. And another thing is, it's important not to, not to give in, not to lose. So I really do believe that if you continue being forthright and saying what you believe and being straightforward with your thoughts, then no matter what somebody tells you, and if you love yourself or really value yourself, then you can really navigate any sort of unpleasant situation like that.
ちょっと言って、日本にはあるんですけど、死ぬ時は一人っていう言葉があるんです。だから自分が納得できる自分を貫いていくということをどの社会でもどのところでもやっていってほしいなと思います。自分が納得できる自分であること。
So in Japanese we have a saying, it's that everybody dies alone, ultimately. So whatever culture and whatever society or whatever country that you're in, you have to be comfortable with yourself. And if you can be comfortable with yourself, then you can live a fulfilled life.
I want to talk talk a little bit. There's a question here from actually a former colleague about what womenomics. And a number of years ago, I was fortunate enough to have dinner with Prime Minister Abe, and I heard him talk about womenomics, and he certainly seemed to be very passionate about it. But described it as difficult for Japan. That there are competing beliefs about it. And since he's no longer prime minister, my sense is that womenomics has not been pushed as hard as he was pushing. And I'm wondering, is that because whether you feel that this is still as important an issue, and do you see this as becoming an issue that's going to continue to be important for Japan and continue to be something that the LDP has to be behind, or is it something that, you know, now doesn't need to be the focus of policy?
例えば高市早苗さんはアベノミクスの継承と言っていまして、岸田さんは今のはちょっと違う考えです。その日本の自民党の中にも積極的な財政出動をして、景気を良くして、物価を上げていかないと、経済を良くしていかないと何もできないというふうに、とにかくまずは投資をしようというチームと、いやいや、財政規律、要はそのプライスマイナスをゼロにして、歳入と歳出を合わせていくことが最初だと思う人たちがいて、割と岸田さんはそのプラスマイナスをゼロにしようというタイプです。私はやっぱり積極的な財政出動をしなきゃいけないというタイプなので、自民党の中でも2つ考えがあるから、それが続いていくかどうかはこれから党内の我々の頑張り次第です。
So as I spoke earlier, Ms. Sanae Takaichi, she very much would like to continue on with the women office policy and focusing women and their economic engagement. However, the current Prime Minister, Mr. Kishida, he's from a second school of thought, and that is that they would like to see more. Fiscal, fiscal responsibility, and they would also like to see more investment in order to increase the economic or improve the economic conditions domestically within Japan by improving the situation around the consumer pricing. And so many individuals, what they do is he has kind of an idea of this plus minus type of idea. So he wants to make sure that the balance book or the balance sheet is zeroed out, and in order to decrease some of those deficits. I myself, though, would like to see much more proactive fiscal mobilization in order to pursue these policies. And whether these policies are continued through the future in the LDP, given these two schools of thought that are currently having this debate, really is up to the amount of effort that my colleagues put up for it.
So I realize time is short, and I want to get in one last question. So I can see that you know, you're a smart, tough, you know, charming Japanese politician, and I can imagine you know, that you're probably going to be rising in the LDP, and you know, maybe 10 years from now, you know, we'll be able to invite you back as Prime Minister of Japan. But I want to ask you, you know, how do you see, you know, if you could make any changes in the areas of diversity and equity in Japan that you could, if you could control the diet for a while, what would you like to do in the near future? What do you see as the most important one or two areas in this in diversity and equity that Japan needs to achieve?
So それは政治的なものなのか、ちょっとすみません、意図が読み取れなかったら申し訳ないんですけど、政治的な分野においては、もう候補者に選ばれるところに、女の人は厳しい選挙区にしかなかなか入れてもらえないというのがあるので、自民党の候補者をきちんとその厳しい選挙区じゃない安定した選挙区にもちゃんと女性を出していくことをするためには、カントリーサイドのチームが決める決定なので、カントリーサイドの意識を変えていかないとダメだなと思うので、それはしなきゃいけないなと思っています。全体的なことはさっきも言ったように、みんなが暮らしやすい生活を作っていくということが、それぞれが活躍できるようになると思うので、やり方としては全員がいい、なんていうんでしょう、日本人がきちんと自分たちの人生を歩める国を作りたいなと思ってます。
So I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I'm going to be on target with with my answer on your question. I wasn't sure if I really got what you were getting at. But from a political point of view, particularly with an LDP, typically it's a matter of where you choose to put up which candidates and which districts and what which constituencies. So what happens is that it's often that female candidates are pushed into more difficult constituencies or difficult districts rather than more stable constituencies or districts. And so within the LDP, the people who decide that are much more in rural Japan or in the countryside, so to speak. So I think in some regard, we have to be able to change these individuals' way of thinking so that way they can put female candidates within those more stable districts as well. Now, as from a I want to say like a total picture point of view, when I'm as far as in being able to achieve those things, as I said earlier, I think it's very important to create a environment domestically within Japan that's conducive for everybody to live in. And I think that if we're able to do that, then whether men or women, then we may see some of those issues also be rectified.
Well, thank you so much. I would love to continue this, and I hope that I can encourage you to come back at a future point and participate in another event. This has really been wonderful. I learned an enormous amount from your talk, and I'm sure our audience did too. It's really one of the best talks I've heard on diversity in a long time. So I want to thank you, Onoda Sensei. And I understand that one of your self-identified missions is reform of universities in Japan. And I hope that we're going to be able to have you come back to Columbia and talk to us about university reform. It's a big issue in Japan. It's a big issue in the United States. And I would like you to come in person, if possible, after COVID is no longer an issue. I also want to just say one word of thanks to our corporate and individual sponsors for their support in these difficult times. Without it, we wouldn't be able to present events like today's talk. And I also want to just thank the audience for joining us today, and just encourage everyone to stay safe and join us again for our next event. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk.